Welcome back to the Yarn from the Heart podcast. I'm your host Mel, and firstly I just want to acknowledge that this is being filmed and recorded on Ngunnawal country, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. It is actually a reconciliation week here in the land down under, so I thought I would talk a little bit about that for this week's episode. And I just wanted to highlight a few deadly people that have had a big impact on Indigenous rights here in Australia, and just kind of share my own thoughts around culture and walking with Christ. And I will be reading all the information that I've already kind of put together because I don't want to get anything wrong. So don't mind me if I'm just like not looking at the camera. So I guess I'll just start by talking a little bit about a Reconciliation Week. So National Reconciliation Week started in 1993 as the week of prayer for reconciliation. Churches and faith groups across Australia supported to help promote healing, understanding, and stronger relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and other Australians. I'll talk a little bit about what is the week of prayer. It was a week when churches and Christian communities across Australia set aside time to pray for reconciliation between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous Australians. So Reconciliation Week actually begins on 27th of May, and that day marks the anniversary of the 1967 referendum. The referendum was when more than 90% of Australians voted to give the federal government the power to make laws for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and to include them in the national census. So the week starts on the 27th of May, which marks that anniversary, and it goes through to the 3rd of June, which marks the anniversary of the Mabo decision, when the High Court recognised that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have traditional rights to their land and rejected the idea that Australia belonged to no one before European settlement. I'm going to be honest here, in my past, I never really, there's a lot of history that I've only kind of learnt about as I've gotten older, and more because I've kind of have just sought out the information myself. Obviously I talked about me coming into the Christian faith just last year, and I had a lot of questions around culture and where does culture fit into the faith for me, because obviously there's a lot of discrepancies between beliefs, and our people are very spiritual people, and there's some things that didn't really make sense to me. And when I came into the faith, I had a lot of questions about everything. I'm someone that needs to know everything about everything, and if something just don't make sense to me, and no one can change my mind. So for me, I'm someone that really needs a little proof in things, I guess. But keeping in mind that I still am a very spiritual person, and culture is really important to me, and I just had a lot of questions. And I was at lunch with two of the elders from the church, and I was like, but culture is just something that's never going to leave me. And I kind of had this idea that I would have to pick one or the other. And they were kind of giving me a little bit of a history lesson, did you know the background of NAIDOC week and how that started with the prayer of the morning day and things like that. I was like, wow, I had no idea. I'm always looking for ways where I can empower both Christianity and culture, because they both play a big part in my life. They're both very important to me. And I feel like even for myself, I kind of had this idea that I would have to pick one or the other, which is not the case. So like I mentioned just before, which is also part of Reconciliation Week, 3rd of June, which marks the anniversary of the Mabo decision, when the High Court recognised that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have traditional rights. A lot of these significant dates here in Australia relating to First Nations people, there's a lot of faith embedded in those significant dates. So yeah, for this episode, I did want to just mention a few really deadly fellas that have had a big impact on Indigenous rights and play a big part in history. And yeah, I'm just going to get into that. Firstly, Eddie Mabo, he led the legal challenge that resulted in the Mabo decision and helped establish native title rights in Australia. I'm really sorry if I pronounce the next last name incorrectly, but the next person I'm going to mention is David Unipon. He was an inventor, writer, and a preacher, and actually his face is on the $50 bill. The next person is Sir Douglas Nicholls, athlete, civil rights advocate. He became the first Aboriginal governor of South Australia. Albert Namatjira became one of the most famous Indigenous artists and helped bring Aboriginal art into the mainstream Australian culture. William Cooper, one of Australia's most important Aboriginal rights leaders, helped organise the Day of Mourning on January 26, 1938, which protested the treatment of Aboriginal people and called for equal rights. You want to know one thing that all these fellas have in common? They are all men of faith. I really felt like I wanted to highlight these fellas because something I've noticed since getting baptized, and when I mentioned to other black fellas that I'm a Christian now, some of them get a bit funny with me, and I've noticed a few people that have become a bit standoffish with me because of my decision. And I was talking about it with someone the other day, and they had asked me, do you know why some First Nations people don't agree with religion and stuff? And I do understand why people don't agree with it, but nobody was holding a gun to my head telling me you're going to become a Christian now. This is a decision that I made, and it wasn't that people were brainwashing me or drilling it in my head. I got to be like this and do this. It came as a shock to myself when I started experiencing things and feeling this presence of Jesus around me. And even for me, I had a lot of questions. But I'm telling you now, there's never come a moment in my walk with faith where I felt like I had to choose culture or Christ. And I get, people don't agree with it, and people don't understand why, because I'm a First Nations woman myself. But at the end of the day, you cannot judge other people because of their faith. And I understand why people reject the faith, because of the association with colonial oppression, including the forced removal of children on missions. But any person or group of people that use faith to control, dominate, or manipulate other people are engaging in religious abuse. And that still happens today. It happened in the past, it's still happening today, and I completely understand why some people don't agree with black fellas becoming Christian and things like that. But I made the decision to follow this faith. And it actually is not about religion. It's not even about Christianity. It's about following Jesus Christ. And I just really hope that a lot more people can understand that. I chose to come into this faith because I chose Jesus Christ. And that's something I wish a lot more people would understand. And I wish people just wouldn't judge other people based on their faith and things that they believe in. And it's really sad that people try to use religion as a way to control, eliminate, change our people's way of living. But I really do believe in that what other people mean for evil, God will turn to good. And, God doesn't make any mistakes, and there's a reason why he chose all these men of faith to be so prominent in like significant dates and moments of Australian history. Like, that was not by mistake. God selected those First Nations people to be so significant in these changes that have had a huge impact. Like, come on. One of these fellas literally have their faces on like a $50 note. That's pretty deadly if you ask me. When I was kind of typing up like what I was going to mention in this podcast, there was a Bible verse that came to my mind, and I'm just going to find that now. So this is from Joel 2:25, and I'm just going to say the first line. And I will restore you the years that the locust has eaten. This verse is part of a promise from God that he will restore and bless his people after a season of judgment, loss, and hardship. And I really believe that verse, and I feel like it's significant for the change that is still yet to come for First Nations people in Australia. God does not make mistakes, and he chose them fellas of faith to be advocates for Aboriginal people, and they have had a huge impact on Indigenous rights here in Australia. And I pray for the continuing reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. God will restore what has been lost, and he will bring healing to this country. And I really believe that in my heart. And yeah, it is Reconciliation Week, so I just wanted to kind of spend this episode talking a little bit about that. This episode might be a bit more shorter than the other ones, but also I said that last time it didn't end up being that much shorter. But thank God this wasn't an episode where I was blubbering and crying again, because yeah, my last few episodes were just a little bit emotional for me, and this one's just a little bit more chill. But yeah, that's it for episode 5, Walking with Christ and Culture. I feel like this one's actually going to end up being like a part 2, because I would like to talk a little bit more about my own experience, but I really just wanted to keep this one kind of straightforward and just to have a little reflection for National Reconciliation Week. And yeah, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.